So we have discussed liberal principles, we have discussed how to defend them and what to do. So what is missing, in a way, is the elephant in the room, because everybody is discussing what's going to happen after the change of presidency in the United States. In a way, this man is the most straightforward man. He always says what he will do, and he does, what he will do, what he said. But nevertheless, we are all wondering, what does that mean, really? We have the big announcement of tariffs, Mexico, Canada, China. That already he has announced as in his usual style, rather pompous style. But nevertheless, we need to know, how will this play out? How do we see this in the regions? And a global network like this is the best venue to discuss this. We have our very competent moderator, Siegfried Herzog, Regional Director for Latin America of the Naumann Foundation, going to moderate this. And we have our three networks, the one from Asia, the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats, in the form of Mardi Seng, from the Candlelight Party of Cambodia, sharing the CALP perspective. We have Elizabeth Adundo from the Orange Democratic Movement of Kenya, representing the Africa Liberal Network on this panel. And last but not least, we have Felix Marat Diaga, who is here with us on Zoom, so he should be able to hear us right now. He is from the Fundación Libertad in Nicaragua and president of the Network for Latin America, RELIAL. Felix, can you hear us?
I can hear very well.
Okay, very well. Maybe we could hope the organizers put his image up, then we can see him as well. We can see him on the small screen here in front of us. Ah, here you go. Now you're also on the big screen. All right, I hand this over to Ziggy.
Thank you very much, Rainer. Welcome to all of you. In the difficult time after lunch, when everybody is a bit sleepy, so I hope we wake you up with talking about, as Rainer said, the elephant in the room or in the world. And he indeed sometimes resembles an elephant with a elephant in a toy shop. And yeah, when all is said and done about decline and so on, the US is still the central country or the most powerful country in the world, and what they do and what they do has an enormous impact. And being a presidential system, the character of the president, what he does, what he believes in, does have an impact on all of us. So, without further ado, the way we go about this is we have first a statement from each of you. First, as in the program, first Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats from Mardi. Then we hear the African perspective from Elizabeth, and finally the Latin American perspective from Felix. And I would really invite you to focus on the issues in the region. Obviously, you can talk about your own country as well, but we are interested in a wider perspective. Then we'll have maybe some reactions to each other. I'll ask maybe some questions, and then we open it up to the audience for a broader discussion. Yeah. So for now, we can speak in English, but afterwards for Q&A, you might need the translation. So, without further ado, Mardi, if you could give us the perspective from Asia.
Good afternoon. It gives me a great pleasure to represent the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats in this distinguished panel and on the recent U.S. election. CAL, as you may know, it is a regional network of liberals and democratic political party in Asia. We currently have 10 member parties across Southeast, East, and Central Asia. In a way, CAL can be considered as a RELIAL and African Liberal Network, ALN, counterpart in the Asian region, although I believe that the RELIAL and ALN have a greater number of and diversity in your membership. I have been invited in this panel to share the issue and expectations of Asia regarding Trump electoral victory, which took place in the context of a world increasingly being defined by geopolitical tension, democratic recession, and economic uncertainty. In Asia, the headline, "How is Asia bracing for Donald Trump 2.0?" Or how are American Asian allies trying to Trump-proof their policies? Or how is Asia preparing for Trump curveballs? Reflect the uncertainty that Asian policymakers and observers are feeling after Trump's decisive electoral victory. But before I continue, let me acknowledge that there are two schools of thoughts regarding this. First, the more optimistic perspective is that there's so-called adults in the room claiming that Trump's policy instinct could still be checked and frustrated by well-meaning officials and technocrats left within the administrations. And the second school of thought is a little more scary view, is that the incoming administration could usher in a Trump unhinged, meaning the president emboldened by election result, control of both House of Congress, unburdened by re-election concern, he could do whatever he wants with minimal restrictions or restraint. But as much as I want to be optimistic, I'm afraid that the second Trump administration will be more unpredictable and transactional than the first, with significant repercussions for security, for political and economic outlook in Asia and elsewhere. For this reason, it might be a useful exercise for us to anticipate what possible issue might come up during Trump's second term on security, political, and economic fronts, and how we should respond to them. In terms of regional security for Asia, first, Trump would most likely continue the Indo-Pacific strategy, which had its beginning during his first term and retained by Joe Biden. This strategy seeks to ensure that the region is free and open to all amidst China's increased influence and assertiveness. It is focused on countering China and includes strengthening of alliance and partnership throughout the region. Second, Trump would demand more from its Asian allies, whether it is Japan, South Korea, or Taiwan. Despite the possible continuation of Indo-Pacific strategy, Trump has a strong belief that the mutual defense treaties that rely on US military power are unfair. For example, he stated that he would demand South Korea to pay $10 billion annually to host the US troops in South Korea. Third, Trump may not give a high priority on the South China Sea dispute or the Taiwan Strait tension, despite its tough line on China. This is because of his transactional leadership style, which may put premium on avoiding US involvement in potential conflict by striking a deal with Beijing, which may be detrimental to its ally like Taiwan and the Philippines. Fourth, Trump could potentially heighten division in the region by forcing Asian countries to choose sides in the US-China superpower competition. This could put Asian countries in a difficult position, as they may have to choose between the security and the economic interest. Fifth, Trump may unwittingly spur an arm race in Asia. If allies in the region are fearful of Trump unilateral dropping protection, they may think that they should rely on themselves more. South Korea and Japan already pledged to increase their defense spending, for example. Worse, if countries in Asia could not trust the US nuclear umbrella, they might explore their own nuclear deterrent. Politically, Asia may have braced for the following. First, given Trump's transactional leadership style, he would most likely veer away from the value-based diplomacy. Having a transactional approach means that the priority should be U.S. national interests, not promoting values such as democracy and human rights. On his first term, Trump engaged with authoritarian leaders like North Korea leaders Kim Jong-un, and Russian President Putin. We can expect Trump to revise these ties in his second term. Second, Trump's leadership style and his prioritizing of economic growth over democratic principle could embolden Southeast Asian dictators, right-wing populist movement. Myanmar generals and the Cambodian autocratic elites, for example, would welcome the prospect of US president less focused on democracy and human rights. This could deepen and lengthen Asian democratic recession and result in a much more difficult operational environment for opposition leaders and democracy activists. Finally, in the term of economy, Asia can anticipate the following. First, Trump would consider China as his main target, but his economic policy could also impact on other Asian countries. During his first term, he launched a trade war against China, placing tariff on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. For his second term, he vowed to double down on tariffs on China. While China is the primary target, other Asian countries, most of which have close economic ties with China, will also be affected. Asian economy, which benefit from the previous trade war, may suffer this time around Trump, as he expects to balk at US-China trade flows simply being rerouted through other countries. Vietnam in particular could be negatively affected because its trade surplus with the US, which is now the fourth largest in the world. And second, Trump would most likely impose tariff on both enemies and allies alike. He called himself as the tariff man, and trade levies are the centerpiece of his economic platform. For one, he proposed to have 60% levy on all Chinese import, 10 to 20% across the board tariff on other countries. These tariffs could result in inflation, trade tensions, and long-term economic instability. According to estimate, American imports from the region would fall by 3%, export to it by 8% because of these tariffs. Highly traded dependent economies of Asia will severely hit by these. Political destabilizations within the region will be the consequence. I know this is a long list, but Trump would favor bilateral over multilateral in terms of trade agreements. He believed that US can better leverage its strength and size by working bilaterally. During his first term, he immediately showed dislike of multilateralism. By withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a trade deal involving many Asian states. While campaigning for a second term, he also said that he would junk the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework between the US and the 13 other countries, many of which are also in Asia. In replacement of this multilateral framework, Trump may push for bilateral trade agreement instead. So in summary, my sense is that Asia will be facing several issues, problems, and uncertainty on the security front, political, and economic front. We are now witnessing the specter of Trumpism, a unique blend of economic nationalism, nativism, and strongman approach to leadership. And its repercussions would reverberate not only in Asia, but also other parts of the globe. As democracy advocates and open economy supporter, I think we have a very bumpy road ahead of us under Trump 2.0. Still, we persevere, and we continue doing what we are doing, because like everything else, this is short pass. It's only 4 years.
Thank you, Marty, for this really comprehensive overview. Yeah, you get the feeling that Trump regards security cooperation more as a sort of protection racket, where you pay the local boss protection money. That's sort of the idea. And I think as liberals, also on the economic field, we need to be really concerned. I mean, there are some liberals or libertarians who support Trump, or who have been supporting Trump. When you listen to his trade ideas, nothing could be further from the basic tenets of liberalism of Adam Smith and David Ricardo than that. Maybe there's one moderating factor might be that that sort of tariff policy will ignite inflation, as you mentioned, in the US. We've just seen that Biden was killed by inflation, Harris. The Republicans might put a brake on it if it gets too much out of hand. That would be one hope. So now we hear from Africa. Elizabeth.
So much for that. It's so hard talking after such an elaborate presentation. So we all understand that Africa has a myriad of issues ranging from unemployment, given that it's the youngest continent in the world. We have issues to do with climate change. We have issues to do with governance that will also be like runaway corruption. We have issues to do with healthcare and education. We have issues to do with inequality and food insecurity. So what does all this mean in the 2.0 Trump era? One of the things we say in Africa is that when the US coughs, catches a cold, everybody coughs, the whole world coughs. And so we expect that there will be effects of his rule. And I will base this from his first term, how he related with us. In his first term, there was a lot of cutting on the budget on issues to do with governance and democracy. And this led to the rise of dictators in Africa. Because as it is, the Republicans behaved more like mother hen, like the big brother. Every time something will happen in Africa, they will always raise an alert. But during Trump's first rule, we didn't have more of that. He was only concerned with America. Again, in this time, Trump has been very elaborate in saying America first. So what does that mean to the 100 of immigrants from Africa who are in America illegally? We expect them to come back home or to work under unacceptable conditions because they're hiding to make a living for themselves. Number 3 is the issue of security and partnerships. During the first term on Trump's rule, they invested so much on security along the borders, the Sahel and the East African region. And that in itself was a problem for us in East Africa because that gave birth to the rise of militias. This gave birth to the issues of women getting sexually abused, and there was nowhere they could report to because, hey, it's the big brother who is funding that. So there was nowhere that they could report that. We had young men who were turning into extremists, getting into what is it called, terrorism in the Horn of Africa and East Africa and the Sahel regions. And that gave the locals a lot of insecurity issues in as much as they have their own security base for the Americans. Number 3 is I want to talk about the economic relationships. We saw in 2022, 49 heads of states from Africa went to the White House to make pacts on bilateral engagements and business associations it was called US to Africa or Africa to US trade. And in this, President Biden pledged 55 billion USD to help Africa in the markets. But with the new administration, that is unlikely to happen because for Trump, it's America first. He doesn't give a damn about Africa. Another point is the aid in terms of healthcare and education. we've seen so many projects in Africa being funded by the USAID. You'll see signposts in many villages in Africa written from the American people. During his first term, most of these organizations had to close shop because there was no funding. And if they were funded, they were really underfunded, that they did not have any tangible results to measure from that. So again, we expect that from the American people will be reduced. Yeah, so for me, with the reduction and with the closure that we're expecting on Trump Point 2, I think it's a good chance for Africa, because as it is, there's a vacuum. I think it is time for Africa to be strategic in courting other partners. You know, we have the Russias, we have the US, the Chinas of this world. These are people that you can be strategic with and do what favors the whole region. We work together as strategic partners, not like a big brother and people who need help. I think for the longest, Africa has been helped by the big brother, America, and we have not seen so much change in our lives. And so I would encourage our brothers and sisters from Africa that we need to focus on African Union Agenda 2063. This is a very good platform for us to get good partners and to do things that would work for us as Africa. Because as a young continent, we have everything that we need. Africa holds about half of the world's resources in terms of minerals, in terms of human resource, in terms of everything, you name it, it's found in Africa. Why is it that we cannot pull together and actualize Agenda 2063 of the African Union and have a more stable, more equitable continent that can compete with the other continents as peers, not as people who need help? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Really an interesting additional perspective, and especially the impact that this sort of up and down of aid flows can cause, and yeah, that's certainly not a way to foster long-term development. Now we turn to our host, in a way, the president of Relial, Felix. Obviously, in the recent elections, a lot of Latinos have voted for Trump, especially Cubans, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, as I understand. Maybe you can give us a perspective on what's in store for Latin America. Are there some aspects that should give us hope, or is it as bleak a picture as we've heard from our two other friends?
Thank you, Siggy. Indeed, the election of President Trump has significant implications for Latin America. There are close economic ties, but also the political influence of a major superpower in this hemisphere. And this makes that the region grapples with complex challenges to democracy, economic development, and geopolitical stability. But from the perspective of Relial, we insist on our commitment to promoting global liberal democracy. The outcomes of the Trump's presidency could be multidimensional, so to speak, in the sense that this election brings, from our perspective, both opportunities but also risks, and we should say that. First of all, Trump's anti-communist rhetoric, going back to your question, Siggy, resonates strongly with significant portions of Latin Americans in the United States who are also voters, particularly those who come from Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, where the radical left-wing regimes have eroded democratic institutions. These diasporas come to the United States, and of course, it's only natural that these diasporas will favor a president that has a strong anti-communist rhetoric. Mr. Trump's strong stance against socialism aligns with these aspirations of millions of Latin Americans who yearned for freedom and democratic governance. You have clearly mentioned the Cuban American community in Florida, which indeed has been a key factor in President Trump's electoral victory in this state. And not only that, but that stance has galvanized the diasporas in Florida due to the firm opposition to this ideology and the nasty experiences that we Nicaraguans have with Ortega, that Venezuelans have with Nicolas Maduro, and of course the Cuban dictatorship. Florida's vote demonstrated how a robust anti-communist message could mobilize the Latin American diasporas in the United States that have experienced firsthand consequence of authoritarianism. Now, going beyond the voters, the Latin American voters, the question is what would happen towards Latin America? And I think that a important signal, although I would not place so much faith on an individual necessarily, but the appointment of Senator Marco Rubio as Secretary of State has generated optimism among pro-democracy activists in the region. Senator Rubio's deep understanding of Latin America, particularly his awareness of the challenges posed by authoritarian regimes, positioned Senator Rubio as a key ally, not only for Relial, but as a key ally to fostering democratic movements. His Cuban heritage and consistent advocacy for freedom in the region could bring renewed focus to the plight of oppressed nations. And I think that it speaks very well the fact that in my character as a Relial president, only 24 hours after the election, I was contacted by members of his team to have an open conversation. As president of Relial, I have been also invited to the transition of power in January. And these are only diplomatic gestures, but I think that speak highly on the closeness that at least in Latin America, due to Senators Rubio's and other key Republican allies have with Relial. So my first reflection would be that for our network, I think this new presidency opens some opportunities. However, I would like to also speak about the risk and have a nuanced approach. Mr. Trump's approach to governance indeed raises questions about consistency and a strategic alignment. While his rhetoric is strong, his past term was characterized by a transactional approach to foreign policy that sometimes prioritize short-term gains over long-term democratic goals. So there are concerns that such transactional perspective might limit a comprehensive engagement with Latin America beyond addressing a specific crisis in countries like Venezuela or Cuba. Moreover, the rise of the Chinese and Russian influence in Latin America is another big question. China's financial backing of infrastructure projects in Latin America, direct loans to autocratic regimes in Latin America, has deepened the economic dependency towards China. On the other hand, Russia, through this media propaganda and military alliances, has supported regimes of Venezuela and Nicaragua. So the approach that President Trump will have towards China and Russia will also have a direct implication for Latin America. The Trump administration's focus on confronting these global actors might be an opportunity for Latin America. But on the other hand, if we do not see a clear stand in stopping this malevolent influence, the news for Latin America might not be so positive. In conclusion, while there is optimism from the Relial perspective, we understand that the fight for democracy in Latin America, from the Relial perspective, does not solely depend on opposing radical leftist regimes. We have said this over and over again. Democracy is not only about opposing leftist regimes. Democracy is about strengthening institutions, promoting economic freedom, fostering regional collaboration, and the U.S. engagement must balance the rhetoric with tangible support for civil society, from free markets, and from democratic coalitions. In conclusion, Trump's presidency presents a unique opportunity, from our perspective, to counteract the influence of authoritarian regimes like China and Russia in Latin America. However, realizing this potential requires a principled strategy that prioritizes human rights rather than a polarizing rhetoric. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felix. If I could just ask a direct question to you, because it didn't touch all that much on the economic side, and especially in Mexico, but also in other countries, there's a fear that they will be very harshly impacted by protectionism. If you would like to comment a little bit on that.
Indeed. If we look at his past performance, President Trump's first presidency was characterized by a very unique style. I think that some of us who come from a more diplomatic tradition might not be so comfortable, but his style is of a deal maker. He would say things that, at least on paper, look very radical, very controversial. And I think that the issue of tariffs with Mexico and Canada is an example, but he has shown an ability to make deals. So my hope, and I will go back to one of the panelists that I think mentioned the two schools of thoughts when it comes to President Trump. I think that he is used to have this very, in terms of trade, this very anti-trade policy, very protective of domestic commercial interests in the U.S. But on the other hand, we have seen an ability to make deals. So I think we need to wait and to see the real results, and not to put all our analysis only in his rhetoric.
Thank you, Felix. We have heard three rather different, I think, perspectives. The last one that Felix gave us is one that has also some significant elements of hope, at least for Latin America. But he has mentioned one aspect that I would like you to quickly react to before we open the floor, and that is, Felix mentioned the appointment of Marco Rubio. Now, given the whole pool of potential candidates, a lot of people feel that Marco Rubio is the best that we can get under the circumstances, and he indeed has a commitment to strengthen democracy. How do you feel about that? Because you mentioned that the dictators in Cambodia and in Myanmar might breathe more easily. Elizabeth, you mentioned that in Africa, again, the civil society and people who try to strengthen democracy in young democracies might feel left alone. How do you see the appointment of Marco Rubio? Might there be hope that he also takes a look at these issues in your region?
Personal feeling aside, regarding, because the election is over and the cards has been dealt, and I was in Washington D.C. last week, and we heard about the incoming Secretary of State is going to be Marco Rubio, and Marco Rubio has been a supportive and friend to us for who are human rights defenders and opposition activists in Asia, especially in Cambodia. There is a bill that he has supported regarding democracy in Cambodia, and it has not passed, but now because the Republican are controlling both the House side and the Senate side, so we are very hopeful. Yes, we are very hopeful with him regarding democracy and human rights.
For me, it will be wait and see attitude, because I know he's not working on a vacuum. There are policies in place which we would expect him to follow to the latter. So yeah, we wait and see what will happen. Yeah.
Before we continue, I would like to acknowledge the presence of my boss, René Klaff, the head of the international department of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, who will be with us for the rest of the day. Thank you for coming over, René, and giving us some time for the that you get an impression of the in-depth discussion that we're having here before the Grand Congress starts. I think we have microphones ready, so let me open the floor for those of you who have questions. Questions, comments? Not yet for the moment. Then let me ask, Fabio.
Hi everyone. I had a chance. Hey Felix, great to see you. Even though online. Hope we can get the chance to have you in our presence soon. And I'm also I'm cautiously hopeful about the nomination of Marco Rubio, especially given the fact that he's the first Latino to assume this important position in American government. I was in the U.S. in the weeks of the election. I had a chance to go to Pennsylvania and to feel the climate of the elections, and I'm actually interested in hearing from you guys what kind of lessons the apparent arrogance that the Democrats have portrayed in the whole process of following along with a president that was not apparently capable, not even physically capable to run, and then just avoiding hosting a process to choose the appointee and just simply putting the person who was the next in line in the previous election, and then denying long-standing tradition in both parties. And what kind of lessons do you think, and that goes also to you, Ziggy, what kind of lessons do you think that what happened in the US can teach us in our daily struggles in our own countries? Each one of us has their own battles and their own circumstances in their own countries, but I feel like as liberals, sometimes we tend to underestimate the most primitive instincts of voters, and that leads us to several defeats that could be avoided, I guess.
Thank you, Fabio. I would suggest let's start with Felix, because he's actually been in the US and has seen the election up close. So he's probably best placed to react. And then I'll ask our other two panelists, and I'll add my 2 cents afterwards. Felix, you have the floor.
Yes, absolutely. As Relial president, I've been very careful in keeping robust, friendly contacts with both campaigns. I was invited to speak at the teams of both campaigns at certain points. So, of course, there are many criticisms that I could make, but I would like to focus on one thing that I believe, as Fabio clearly said, and by the way, Fabio, it's always a pleasure to see you as a rising star of Relial. A lesson learned is that no matter how capable any politician is in articulating complex ideas, voters care about daily immediate issues. And I think that the Democratic campaign learned this the hard way in the issue of the Southern border. Of course, as liberals, we have a very different point of view in terms of how immigration should be tackled. This is something that we have discussed in our Relials and also international liberal meetings. We are not against any types of discrimination, but we believe in the rule of law. And every country has the right to keep, the borders safe within the framework of human rights and within the frameworks of the rule of law, within the framework of international treaties. And I think that the Democratic campaign was not able to make the voters really comfortable with the promise that the borders could keep safe. I think this is a lesson for all, not only liberal, but for all democracy-oriented parties around the world. This is not only a battle of complex ideas. We need to be better as politicians in our performance, in persuading the voters, and in delivering results.
Mardi, what would you like to add something to that?
Actually, I don't have too many comments because I think politics in the U.S. has become so divisive, and politics in the U.S. used to be a rational, reasonable ways of communicating and discussions, and now I think it has been so divisive. Even in my own family, there's there's a Trump supporter and anti-Trump supporter. And so, and the procedure of the Democratic, I think you mentioned the primary in the Democratic the Democratic Party, why they didn't go through the process and all that. I think it's much more complicated than that. It's just a frame. It came out on the TV. It framed a certain way, and then that's how they took the discussion in that direction. But I think it's much complicated than that. There's no easy answer, and so, yes.
Fabio, you see, the thing with Democrats is that we normally feel that we know what the voters want. Most times we will assume that our policies is what, is what keeps them going. But that's normally not the case. Most times we never go down to our voters to ask them, does this work for you? For us, we are always policy-oriented. We want to copy from what other countries are doing, but we lose touch with the normal, ordinary voter who will vote for us. So I think that's one of the mistakes that the Democrats did in the US. They assumed that because they are competing against Trump and he has a bad record according to people, they will definitely carry the day. But it's not always so. And also that brings us to the issue that we were discussing the other day with my brother Bobby, that what is it that voters want? Because you might think you are bringing them a competent candidate and they go to the opposite direction. That is just to tell you that the person you think is not is the person, because he understands the pulse of the people. Another issue that maybe we need to discuss is that when was it on 21st of July, when Kamala was unveiled as the presidential candidate, for us feminists, it was a very big thing. We were saying, finally, the world is getting a woman. Finally, the women will rule the world. But when you think about it, it's like, is the world really ready for women leadership? Maybe that's a conversation we'll have in another forum. But yeah, it's something to think about. Is the world ready for us women? Thank you.
Well, coming from Germany, which has been ruled by Angela Merkel for 16 long years, and just now coming from Mexico, where we've just elected a woman president, and a Jewish woman. So a lot of parts in this world are ready for female leadership. And both of these are not products of some political dynasties like Sonia Gandhi or so I think we can be slightly optimistic. I think Kamala Harris didn't lose because she was a woman. In the end, I mean, let's also be clear. This was a relatively close election. We're talking of a few 100,000 votes that in the swing states could have gone either direction. So it would be a bit wrong to characterize this as a total wipeout of the Democrats, especially when you look at the House and Senate elections. The Democrats did quite better than expected, and a lot of their candidates ran several points ahead of Kamala Harris. So there is something to be said for the overall messaging. I think the issue that Felix mentioned, migration, is indeed an issue, and that is I want to concentrate what do we as liberals learn from it. And of course in Germany, where we have elections coming up, one lesson is indeed, migration is something that people expect an answer to. And they feel really annoyed when they get the sense that the government has lost control. Whether that is actually true or not, and to what extent you can exercise control, is beside the point. When there's a strong feeling that we're no longer in control of our borders, that is something that really annoys people at a very emotional, very deep level, such as a sense of security and also a sense of justice that this is something illegal. And obviously we also see the other side of the coin, that people who migrate also exercise a fundamental human desire to better their lives, and they don't do this to harm another country. Most migrants go there and contribute to that society. But from the point of view of the political debate, that the fear of loss of control and threat is real. I think we also have, at least in the richer countries, I think we have a backlash to the whole culture war debate, to the whole identity politics that has gone too far. That in terms that instead of fighting for equality, and that that it should not matter whether you're a woman or LGBT or whatever, we are now basically saying, and this group needs now to be privileged, and that group needs now to be privileged because they have been underprivileged before. So a continued inequality of treatment, that is also something that probably people have reacted to. I don't want to really debate the merits of it, but I think that that is something that we see also in Europe. In Europe, especially also with the environmental policies, where people have begun to feel these are too intrusive and too costly for them. And that brings me to the economy. Yes, inflation has been a serious issue, and people haven't given Biden much credit for the improved economic performance because that hasn't yet filtered down, and they rather remember the inflationary shock. Might be an issue in Western Europe too. And lastly, the candidate, I think our Social Democrats now have to go into the election with Chancellor Scholz, who has the distinction of being the most unpopular politician in the country at the moment. So it's a bit like Biden, only that in Biden's case, I think it is less forgivable because he and the Democrats would close their eyes to the fact that he is really not only disliked, but he's physically failing. Yeah, he was. I'm quite sure that he was still fairly capable of exercising his powers and making decisions, but in terms of public communication, in articulating policies, and just giving off the impression that this is a guy who's fit for the next 4 years, they waited far too long to admit that and to allow a real contest between candidates that would have given a chance to really develop a message. And that is, Fabio, the last point I would do that you haven't mentioned, but that is, I think, a lesson we as liberals need to take. It's that you do need a message. With Trump, we all know what the message is. Make America great again. Might be stupid, might be good, but everybody knows it. With Obama, we remember, yes, we can. With Clinton, it's the economy stupid. With Reagan, morning in America. And if you remember the messages of their opponents, no one knows, because they were all over the place with their messages. And if you ask me what Kamala Harris's message was, I have no idea. It was all sorts of things. We won't go back. Yeah, back, okay. A negative message, yeah, exactly. I'm not Trump. Yeah, we know that. But what does that mean? And she had to run away from a lot of positions that she had taken in the past that were unpopular and never really explained the change. So it was hard to do in that short time, and it was hard to craft her own message. So under the circumstances, she did a decent job, but that wasn't enough. But so I think the message that can be distilled down to a simple sentence, and that is authentic in the sense that you understand that comes from the way that person is. That is, I think, something we need to take away, and we all need to remember. I hope that answers your question. And then we have another question from Tiago, and then from Lu.
¿Arranco?
Yeah, Eugenia first.
¿Cómo está? Voy a hablar en español. En el marco de la red de la región de América Latina, el tema sigue siendo la democracia de Venezuela, y quiero ir a la causa Venezuela como una causa que va a traer un alivio en la región, que también tiene que ver con Cuba, por Nicaragua, por lo menos países donde no hay elecciones libres. Y quiero insistir en un tema que depende de la política, más allá que tiene un condimento o un componente importante de los especialistas en la materia en crimen organizado. Creo que es un error seguir tratando al gobierno de Venezuela, que en fraude va a retener el poder, como un gobierno. Es una organización criminal aliada al terrorismo internacional, con una estampida migratoria que va a afectar la seguridad y la paz de nuestra región, con organizaciones que se expanden como el Tren de Aragua y que ya se saben cuáles son sus acciones, incluso usando la migración en nuestros países. A lo que voy es, estamos hablando que defendemos las ideas de la libertad, el libre comercio, la libertad económica, pero no se le pueden permitir a este tipo de organizaciones criminales que han tomado los gobiernos seguir utilizando los beneficios del mundo libre, del libre comercio, de las libres finanzas, cuando estamos hablando de la contaminación de los sistemas económicos y financieros a partir de gobiernos tomados por el crimen organizado que además son aliados del terrorismo internacional. Y voy a que el presidente Trump, en ejercicio, con el apoyo obviamente muy importante de Estados Unidos, cuando quien fue reconocido como presidente de Venezuela fue el presidente Guaidó, activó por acuerdo de las naciones de esta región el TIAR. Y en ese marco de ese tratado se activaron sanciones comerciales, sanciones de ingresos a un montón de personas identificadas con el régimen criminal narcodictador de Maduro. Pero el TIAR también permite que cuando está en juego la seguridad y la paz de la región, como claramente lo está y lo podemos identificar, se pueden activar medidas de incursión de otra naturaleza. No agrego acá la cuestión de la violación de los derechos humanos y todo lo que está sucediendo delante de todos nuestros ojos en Venezuela. Entonces digo, si no puede valorarse como una oportunidad, que es nuevamente Trump presidente de los Estados Unidos, yo soy muy crítica del acuerdo de Barbados porque la experiencia en el mundo indica que ese tipo de negociaciones oxigenan a los dictadores, no hay duda de lo que ha pasado con Venezuela y ese acuerdo que una parte del mundo cumplió y ellos violan sistemáticamente. Marco Rubio es una persona que conoce perfectamente que estas amenazas pueden afectar a la paz y a la seguridad de nuestra región. Y en ese marco, si no es posible a partir del liderazgo de alguno de los políticos de la región, está claro que la marea roja nos está afectando a muchos, pero por lo menos quizás con el liderazgo del presidente Trump, seguramente el gobierno argentino acompaña y habrá que ver si hay otros aliados desde esta perspectiva, si no ven la posibilidad de liderar venezolanos, nicaragüenses, pero esencialmente los venezolanos que están fuera de su país, de liderar de nuevo estos criterios para tener muy en cuenta cuáles son las amenazas, lo que amenaza es esa democracia en particular, pero además a todas las democracias liberales de la región contaminadas por esto que se mezcla, ¿no?, con el crimen organizado, el terrorismo internacional y la verdadera naturaleza de lo que hoy se encuentra como gobierno en Venezuela.
Gracias.
Félix.
Creo que Félix debería responder. Félix, I think you have the floor.
Si me permiten responder en español. Bueno, es que básicamente coincidir plenamente. Creo que más que una pregunta es un comentario al que agregaría que es muy acertado. Creo que Venezuela será el elemento fundamental de la administración Trump con respecto a América Latina en términos de prueba de si las expectativas que se han levantado realmente van a llevarse a un plano de ejecución, porque con respecto a Venezuela creo que se ha intentado absolutamente todo. Es un régimen que efectivamente no puede ser tratado ni siquiera como gobierno autoritario, es prácticamente una cleptocracia vinculada al crimen organizado y debe ser tratado como tal. Así que básicamente coincidir plenamente con la reflexión anterior.
¿Podrías agregar algo sobre el tema que Trump? Sorry, can you add something to the topic? Maybe that Trump, as we have heard several times and as we know, is very transactional, and hence Maduro knows that too. Biden has hesitated to impose oil sanctions because Chevron, at least, and other oil companies are getting oil again from Venezuela. and as we know, Trump's love for oil, is there not a danger that that might trump literally the ideas of Marco Rubio, that once he gets a lucrative deal offered by Maduro?
Yes, indeed. As I said in my previous comment, this will be the test of whether what we've heard is a rhetoric specifically towards Venezuela, or if we're going to see actions that are more robust. So I will have two additional comments on this specific point. Number one, I think that the possibility of a military actions towards Venezuela, although we've heard this famous phrase that all options are in the table, I think they're very low. Based on what I've seen with establishment in the national security field, I believe that the military actions towards Venezuela will be very, very small, probably close to zero for a number of actions. So I think that expecting that actions could be in terms of military incursions, I know that no one has mentioned that specifically, but I just want to basically put that on the table. I grant that very low probability. But there are many other actions on the table, and you mentioned one of them, which is the oil sanctions, and also treating the Maduro dictatorship more as a criminal entity than anything else. Now, thinking out of the box, I think that the big problem it's for domestic U.S. politics is its migration from Venezuela. What can Maduro offer in that regard? There are some conspiracy theories recently in some circles that argue that Maduro could offer taking back hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan deportees in exchange for flexibility. There's no proof that that is indeed on the table, but thinking out of the box, that could be, something, in the future that will be bad news. I don't know. I think we have to wait. And once again, I will insist that having Marco Rubio as Secretary of State at least offers a window of opportunity to think out of the box towards a criminal, corrupt, narco regime such as the Maduro regime.
Thank you. Would you like to add something from your perspective, or?
In Cambodia, we are facing the similar situations, because in Cambodia, as has been publicized, that we are pretty much controlled by certain mafia groups that have online scams that defraud millions of people around the world, especially in China. And I think Marco Rubio will pay attention to that, because also affect a lot of Americans because of this online scam. So I think if we talk about human rights, democracy, they may not hear it. But if we talk about criminalize these thugs, or these trying to address the issue of rule of law, the issue of punishing these criminals, I think the U.S. would pay attention to it in the next term.
Elizabeth, you want to add something? No. Then the next question, Iago.
Hi. So I'd like to hear from you some remarks on the opportunities that we have as liberals in this new government of Trump. Of course, that when we analyze the possibilities of a new government of someone as controversial as Trump, we are more focused on the risks. And I think that in the initial remarks of most of you, we were more focused on the risks that this new administration has. But I would like to hear the half full part of this cup of Trump's new government. And I would say, at least for us in Brazil, there are two main topics that we are struggling in the country, which is the discussion on the size of government, which is a discussion we have been struggling since the Portuguese came in the 1500s. And also a new discussion, which is freedom of speech and the regulation of social media. I believe I wasn't here yet yesterday, but I believe that Fabio talked a little bit about what has been happening in Brazil. We had Twitter banned for more than a month. We have a lot of discussions going on in the Supreme Court now, considering the regulation of social networks that we are seeing that as probably some kind of censorship that we're going to have in Brazil. And I believe that on those two topics, the size of government and the discussion on the regulation of social media and liberty, freedom of speech, we might have opportunities during this new Trump government. So I would like to hear from you which other opportunities that you see that we might have as liberals in his new government.
If I may comment on that, Siki?
Yes, please do go ahead.
I think that is an excellent question, and I welcome that question. One of the challenges that I think that we as liberals have, not only in Latin America, but globally, is that liberalism is quite a very, very broad family of ideas. I personally believe more to the classical liberal tradition. I refer to myself as a classical liberal rather than a libertarian necessarily, but as many of us here at Relial are also part of the Atlas network. And one of the things that I've seen over the last years is that some liberals of a more centered tradition that are closer to social democrats are struggling to have a collaboration with classical liberals on the issue of free markets and on the issue of the size of government. So I think that what we see in the Trump administration is that he has received support from classical liberals precisely because it's very strong position towards the size of government, which I think is a very important conversation that we as liberals should have. The worst scenario as liberals in Latin America that we could have, and I speak strongly about this, is the division among the liberal families, in which we have certain members of our network and even some members of some friends outside of our network that rather move towards other conservative groups because they believe that liberals are not speaking so strongly on against regulations, against big governments. And what just happened in the United States is a clear proof under President Trump that the two narratives can coexist within the democratically oriented politicians. In other words, classical liberals can coexist with those who have other democratically oriented ideas. We do not need to be separated. And I think that an image speaks more than thousands of words. And we have seen the closeness of President Trump with President Milei. I understand that from the European perspective, this is different. It's more complicated because in Europe, the real challenge on most of Europe, the real challenge of democracy is the far right. It's not radical left. In Latin America, it's different because our real challenge to democracy is the radical left. So I think that going back to the question, what's the opportunity? The opportunity is to establish links with the classical liberal families, to establish a conversation with our conservative friends, and do not work to be split. In other words, the worst thing that could happen to liberals is that many of our potential voters rather vote for conservatives than for the liberal proposals. And I believe that that's an opportunity.
Mardi, please.
For me, from a closed society like Cambodia, we take it from the perspective of democracy, human rights defending, and all that. I think it's a welcome change to have the incoming Secretary of State Rubio, because in the past 8 years, or in the past 4 years, the U.S. policy regarding democracy, human rights defending, and things like that, there was like a leadership, and they have not been defending or promoting democracy. And I think with Rubio, I think we are hopeful, we are welcome. But from the regional security point of view, I think of our friends like in Taiwan, in Japan, and all that. I think for them, the uncertainty is very high, and I think they are hedging. They are probably trying to protect themselves. From the economic point of view, regarding the tariff and all that. So, at this point, we don't know what Trump is going to do, or his leader, the secretaries of those areas will do. So I think it's uncertain. But from a democracy point of view, I think we are hopeful.
I'll handle the issue of trade. I think it's time for Africa to go multilateral because we're not sure if trade issues like AGOA would continue with the new administration. So this one offers us an opportunity to look for other partners, look for other friends, and trade together with. Yeah.
If I may add, because Europe has been mentioned, I think one issue that concerns us, of course, is the issue of rule of law. I mean, that an American president is above the law and basically has several serious court cases against him, and then just because he gets elected, they all go away. That sets a rather bad precedent. As liberals, I think we can have different opinions on the degree of economic policy and so on, but basic rule of law should be something that we all agree on, and and I feel America has here set a rather bad precedent for rule of law. It's also partly fault of the Biden administration that they've started far too late to get serious about the investigations, but that is sort of a bad message also because in Mexico and other countries we have the same attitude of presidents. I'm elected, I have the majority, so I should be above the law and no judge should be able to stop me. So that is that's basically what I think Locke called the tyranny of the majority. That has been something liberals have always been against for the last 200 years. So I think that's one area that bothers me a lot. On the positive side, I think that Trump demands from allies to do more, and that goes especially for Europe. I hate to say it, but he has a point. We have neglected our defense for far too long. The Russian colonial war of aggression against Ukraine is a wake-up call. We have now a war of decolonization because Russia doesn't want to let go of its former colonies like Ukraine that have been conquered by Russia and that don't want to be part of Russia. So what they're doing is now what the French did in Algeria or the Brits did in Kenya. I would wish that people in Africa would see the parallel a bit more, that Russia is the last empire, the last European empire that was built in the 16th century. It's just that it conquered its neighboring people and not people across the ocean. But that's a difference of transportation, not of character. But that we are now threatened with such a war in front of our doorstep, I think will also make it possible that we finally get our act together and step up more. Because indeed, there is a point to be said that Europe shouldn't be number 2 behind America when to help Ukraine. I mean, after all, Russia has an economy the size of Italy. Of course, Europe has the economic and financial muscle to support Ukraine stronger, and I think we should. So that's I would say that can be a positive outcome. And if we do that, we can hopefully also find a decent deal with the US that they don't just go away and leave Russia to its own devices, which would be a threat to all of us. Other questions? Here. Achimbek from Mongolia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for your talks. It's great insights. So I just wanted to have one question about, what are your thoughts on the 4 red lines that was reportedly outlined by Xi Jinping to Donald Trump at the last Biden meeting? So are these demands realistic or not in the Trump 2.0 version? And should they be respected or challenged? And I mean, additionally, if they are crossed, those 4 red lines by the Trump administration, what could be the impacts to the Asian countries, African countries, and Latin American countries, like economically, politically, and strategically? I mean, for Mongolia, as you know, we only have 2 neighbors, Russia and China, and any tensions or if their relationships get better, we have like immediate effect not only to the government itself, not only to strategies we built with those 2 neighbors, but also to citizens' lives at like everyday respect. So let's peek a little bit into the future.
Thank you. The fact that Mongolia has built a very vibrant democracy, being wedged between China and Russia, is probably one of the great democratic miracles of this day. But Maudi, I think you should answer to her question.
I don't know about the 4 red lines. Can you?
Yeah, the 4 red lines are for that were proposed from Xi Jinping to Trump administration. The one is, I mean, the most important is the Taiwan independence and the East China Sea, and also the human rights in Tibet, Hong Kong, and Xinjiang, I guess. And the 4th, what was it?
Right to development.
And also, yes, and China's policy, the government itself, right?
I think knowing Donald Trump, you know, when somebody issue red lines like that, is almost like a public challenge to him, and most likely he will address it. So I usually, you know, politicians or governments don't draw red lines publicly, draw red lines to each other, and I think that's just an invitation for trouble. So knowing Donald Trump, I think that he will try to push extended the red line. I have no specific, but yeah, it's just those red lines are probably always there, but people try to avoid it. It's a status quo, you know, don't talk about it, but it's one of those things. So I think we have to wait and see.
Felix, would you like to add something to that?
Yes, I believe that out of the 4 red lines, the first one, which is the position towards Taiwan, basically announcing that China will not tolerate any involvement or protection towards an eventual annexation of Taiwan, is by far the most complex issue. We have seen that under the other administrations, human rights in China, unfortunately, have not been at the core. It was one of the big criticisms that the Uyghur community and the Taiwanese community and also other groups affected directly by China made to the Obama administration in his deal with China, that he decided not to openly mention human rights in China, which is one of the red lines. But on the issue of Taiwan, I think that no one in the United States, and I've spoken about this at length with some of my colleagues at the universities or organizations I collaborate with, no one has a straight answer. Is this a red line, towards Taiwan specifically, a direct test, as Mari has said? Well, it probably is. But on the other hand, the scary part is that it may be completely true. There is an announcement that China will take military actions, direct military actions towards Taiwan, and that will put the United States to the test. I don't have a direct, answer on how the U.S. will react in such a scenario. Just to emphasize that out of the 4 lines, I think that the other 3 lines have already been there, and both Republicans and Democrats have implicitly accepted the other 3 red lines. But on the issue of Taiwan, that's truly scary, and I think that opens a number of deep concerns towards a military scenario in Taiwan in a relative short period of time. I think that we might see that very soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Felix. Any other questions? No, that's not the case. Then I would like to thank, then we'll break a little bit early. I would like to thank all of you. Felix, thanks for taking the time to connect via Zoom. Thanks to the organizers to make this possible. I'm saying this because when we've done things like that in Berlin, they didn't always work. So 1-0 for Chile and its digitalization. Thanks, Mardi, for giving us a perspective from CALD, from Asia, and thank you very much, Elizabeth, for bringing the African perspective. Anything that one of you would like to add that maybe has been left unsaid before we close? No.
I was just to simply add my apologies for not being in person there. I know that I have said this before, but the issue of stateless people around the world, now that I'm suffering this journey myself, I think that it's a new tragedy. Belarus is using that mechanism, of course, and directly China is doing it as well. So I just want to voice my concern for the new tendency, or relatively new tendency, of an increasing number of dissidents in exile. Being an opposition leader in exile used to be an exception and not the norm, not the rule. Now it seems as if we are looking at a world in which autocrats feel empowered to keep people outside of our boundaries and not able to work grassroots. However, technology is helping us break this barrier. So I just want to thank you for, despite the fact that I'm not there present in person and physically, technology has allowed me to be a participant in the events of this wonderful, wonderful gathering. So thank you once again. And to my dear panelists, both of you are extraordinary examples of leadership and courage, just to emphasize how humbled and honored as well to be in your presence in this panel. And thank you, Siggy, as well for your friendship.
Thank you so much. Let's give a hand of applause.